Crittenden, who administers the Poetry Prize, is going to tell you some more. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. We award the Balcones Poetry Prize and the Balcones Fiction Prize for books that are published during the year. And tonight we're honoring the winners of our 2016 Poetry Prize. I know it's 2018, but the deadline for submitting the books is not until January 31st, 2017, and we have our process that we have to go through and so forth. So we run behind on the year, but we originally conceived the Balcones Poetry Prize back in about 1994, I think, and it was to recognize an outstanding book of poetry that had actually made it through the whole process of writing and submitting and editing and publishing and all of the things that have to happen for that book to come out. And so often books go out there and just kind of disappear. We thought that it would be nice to be one of the few institutions that actually gives a prize for a finished book. And I was just looking over our records and our past, and our first prize went to Kathleen Hull, the second prize to Lucia Perillo, Reginald Gibbons, Arthur Zilla, Dana Levin, Lorenzo Thomas, Bill Bergson, Chase Twitchell, Mark Jarman. I can name a lot of names that are outstanding names of poetry, and as I was counting, I just realized that the award that we gave for 2016 is our 20th award. The first one was for 1995, and then we missed a couple of years, so this is our 20th Balcones Poetry Prize. And I'm very happy and proud that it goes to Jacqueline Allen Trimble. As has happened a few times, this is Jacqueline Trimble's first book, American Happiness, from New South Books. And Jacqueline is a professor of English at Alabama State University in Montgomery, and she is published in the Griot, the Offing, the Blue Lake Review. She was a Cave Canem Fellow and a recipient of a Literary Arts Fellowship from Alabama State Council on the Arts in 2017. The judges for the 2016 Poetry Prize were Prudence Arsenault, who is in the room, and she's a poet and a professor of English and Creative Writing at Austin Community College. Richard Price, who is not here tonight, who is a poet and a retired professor of English from ACC. And as I rarely do, I participated as a judge this time, and so it was a great pleasure. Some of my fellow judges said that Trimble should never be taken lightly, even though her poems are so often funny. And I find that one of the most refreshing things about this refreshing new voice is that she can face the darkness and she can embrace tenderness and sensuality. And she doesn't forget to bring her sense of humor. So we really felt that we were really lucky and proud to be able to award the 2016 Balcones Poetry Prize to American Happiness by Jacqueline Allen Trimble.
Thank you so much. I just want the judges, to the community college, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I have to tell you a little story. So John contacted me through Facebook, my Facebook page, and I got this message that said, I'm happy to inform you that you won the Balcones Poetry Prize. And I thought that it was one of my poet friends pranking me. And I thought, who is this? Who is this? But I contacted him back, and he said, no, it's real. I thought, wow. So that was a wonderful, wonderful surprise. One of the best Facebook messages I've ever gotten. So. Okay. I'm not sick, I don't have the flu, or the plague that's going around, don't worry. It's just allergies that, when my husband and I left Alabama, it was 82 degrees and everything was blooming, and like I stopped being able to breathe about 2 days ago, so we'll see how this goes. All right. So I want to begin by reading just a little bit of the introduction to the book. After I finished the book, my publisher asked me to write some sort of preface. And I thought, okay, what am I going to write? And so because I've been a college professor a long time, my first thought was to write something about craft. Maybe I should talk about, how we put poems together. But I thought, why do I want to do that? And so I sat down at my computer and I said, well, we'll just see what comes out, right? We'll see what happens. And the first sentence that came out was this one. My mother was a foot soldier in the fight for civil rights, had a cross burned on her lawn, drove students to Lanier, a local school, to integrate it, and was sued along with CBS for comments she made on television. When I wrote that sentence, I had no idea why I was writing that sentence when I was supposed to be writing this preface to my book of poetry. But I just kept writing. I thought, well, maybe it'll go somewhere. Who knows where it'll go? And this is where it went. And I wanted to just read you a little bit because what I realized in writing this was something very important in terms of my mother's relationship to my life as a writer. In the fall of 1968, I went to Edward T. Davis Elementary School. My mother made sure of it. My father had died earlier that year, and my mother, who was actually my stepmother, was determined to raise me as she thought my father would have wanted. So, I became the only little black child in Davis Elementary that year. I joined the Brownies, and my mother joined the PTA. Whatever minor skirmishes or major wars ensued behind my being at that school, I never heard of them. In those days, children minded children's business and adults minded their own. What I do know is that fall, my mother volunteered to read poems at the fall festival. Dressed in a long flowing skirt and a peasant blouse, she played the part of fortune teller. Children and adults alike entered her small booth to have Mama gaze into her magic 8-ball and tell their future. I went dressed as a ghost. There I was, the only little black child in the whole school, wandering the halls of the festival in a sheet with a pointed pillowcase hat in which my mother had cut 2 little eye holes. It was years before I understood why my mother laughed and laughed and took so many pictures of me in my white sheet that night. Even then, she was teaching me the power and pleasure of ironic juxtaposition, a lesson that continues to inform my sense of humor as well as my poetry. And so the preface came to be called How My Mother Taught Me to Write Poems. That's where I was headed. So we'll see how it worked out. I'm going to read you some of American Happiness. So the book is divided into 3 parts. First part is closure, second part is geography of passion, and the final part is American Happiness. And so closure, you're Southwesterners, right? Well, I'm from the Deep South, born and raised. And Southerners tell stories that never, ever end. So there's never actually any such thing as closure, and we never forget anything. Because when you have a fight, my husband and I have something called the 5-year rule, meaning that you cannot bring up anything that happened more than 5 years ago. It has allowed us to remain married 32 years because, that 5-year rule is a thing. Because when you get in family arguments in the South, you say, well, 40 years ago, you said, right? So there is no closure. So the first part was dedicated to all of these things for which we never find closure. One of the interesting things about being a black woman, African-American woman in the South, born and raised, is you find yourself in the peculiar position of having to defend the South and its craziness sometimes. And it's a very weird place, a very weird place. And so this is my poem, this is my homage to the South. And it's called, Everybody in America Hate the South. Everybody in America hate the South. That land filled to the rafters with ghosts of lynched boys and attics full of souvenirs, dried ears, fingers, genitalia like prunes. The sweet magnolia memory of Miss Scarlett calling for Mammy, who has now grown some dreadlocks and owns the chicken restaurant on the boulevard. America ought to say, thank you, Miss South, thank you for being like Jesus and taking on the sins of the whole country, or being our crazy Aunt Hazel who runs naked through a house full of company shouting all the foolish things we think but can't say. So we can walk around all post-racial and watch Gone with the Wind over and over, swooning from the romance. I'd like to read you just one more poem from that section, Closure. And this poem is called Church Women. And I always tell audiences, this is a very young audience, but I always tell audiences, if you don't recognize the church woman, it's you. Church women. The roll of the eyes and the click of the razor tongue, that smile all sweetness of switchblade. One hand take your gun, one hand hold fast to Jesus. Nobody do nice nasty like church women do. The preacher preach and preach and preach. Well, yes, Jesus. The children sleep good. Fried chicken rise like Satan from the fellowship hall. They eye you over spoonfuls, size up your righteousness with each dip. Double ham hocks for brother this, one little drumette for sister that. Your mouth water so feels like sacrilege or dancing in the spirit. Peach cobbler, praise the Lord. Rutabaga, yams, candied and casserole. Collard greens, mustard greens, turnip greens, ooh, Lord. Black-eyed peas, butter beans, yeast rolls, neck bones, pig ears, Watergate salad, ham, and no, you may not have more mac and cheese till all are served, praise God. The second section of this book is called The Geography of Passion. And the geography covered in this section is both geographical but mainly psychological. And I learned something very odd when my mother died. And so people came to the house and they brought dishes and they sat down and they talked about how they remembered my mother, et cetera, et cetera. And what I learned about my mother is that she had a husband I never knew anything about. Apparently in her youth, she had married quite young, and her husband had not been a very good person. She had returned to her parents' house and she never spoke of him again. And so it became a very interesting family situation that I couldn't ask anybody about because all the people who would have known were dead. So this is called Cinderella Finds Happiness with Her Third Husband. There are no fairies in fairy tales. That should have been a clue. But her nature was romantic, her stepmother wicked, two half-sisters both cruel and ugly. Same old, same old. So, after one moonlit stroll and a missing slipper, she married in haste and then repented. What a prince! Who would have thought caps could hide the incisors of a wolf? Soon he vanished like fairy dust on the stroke of midnight. Next time, not for love, but money. She didn't even mind his troll-like looks. His heart was kind, so she made a life of tender words and pretty things until he lay down and never rose again. Heart failure, they supposed. Following the usual instructions, she lit every candle in the kingdom, pronounced a brief incantatory spell, and kissed his dead lips gently. But he stayed dead. Too much kindness and not enough true love to pump the blood. She buried him in his blue serge, the perfect shade of steel coffin. Fairy tales tell a true story, if only she had known how to read. Once upon a time, love came and brought a dowry of dragon fire, poison apples, 100 years of sleep for the whole town. On a good day, a glass coffin, courtesy of the wicked. Quest-worthy and quick, love made a golden chalice. To find it, she will trade her voice for silence, her strong tail for hairy legs, which must be shaved regularly and well. Each step will be a torture of pins or glass shards. At the climax, she will tiptoe through a world to see her heart's desire waltz a woman full of words and with hairy gams into the sunset. Background music, sure to get copious playtime and awards, swells as she sinks teary-eyed into the sea. Not a dry eye in sight. Sea girl, it never turns out well. Some woman drowned at the bottom of the sea, frozen in an alleyway, her heels or arms or head hacked off, tortured to death by a stepdaughter's momentary beauty. Why look for happy endings there? Try this. Third time, charming. One day in the supermarket, long after she had bartered rose-colored glasses for bifocals and good wine, magic happened around the eggplant bin. She found his little paunch endearing. He liked her red stilettos. Old dogs can and do, she thought, can and do. So, I'm going to read this. This is a poem about, this is a hard poem. I was adopted, and my biological mother, who I came to know later in my life, one of the things that she told me over and over again was how she came to give me up for adoption. And it was like a mantra to her. It was almost as if through the retelling of this story, she could exorcise these demons, this guilt that she felt. And I had a perfectly happy childhood with loving parents, and but it struck me that this was a source of great pain in her life. And so this poem is for her, and it's called Lineage. My father was a thin brown line. An arrow shot through her body on its way somewhere else. And nothing could stop his trajectory, and nothing could bring him back. Not her love, as sharp as paper's edge, not her swelling belly, not the word my grandmother named her when she threw her out. If only he had loved her enough to set her on fire and leave her ash on the empty altar instead of alone. This is the story my mother tells me the first time we meet. She tells it again the next time and will again for years. How her sister came to get her, how hate sustained her, how she wrapped me in a blanket and gave me away. What can I do for her? What can I do? So one last one from Geography of Passion, and then I'm going to read a few poems from American Happiness, which is really kind of the touchstone for the whole book. A woman tells the history of her people. My body splits wide. Between the halves lies the ocean my two great-great-grandfathers crossed one way or another. This one from a western shore of Africa, a pinpoint I will never find along 1,000 miles of maybe. That one from a tiny town in Ireland, which can be named but will not be. In the loins of each my ancestors formed, creatures rising from the sea, who walked upright days and years to a small town in Alabama. This is not a tender romance, but a tale of swung axes and hunger, of violence of water that baptized and tore, like one body that sheds its own skin and enters by force the skin of another, the second remade in a stranger's image. And instead of doing my homework, I wrote a poem. So the paper was about, I was really fascinated by the fact that in 1968, the number 1 and number 2 shows in America were Gentle Ben, starring Clint Howard. It was the number 1 show. And the number 2 show was the Andy Griffith Show, starring Ron Howard, his brother. What struck me, or what fascinated me about this fact was that both of these were about Southern law enforcement. So Gentle Ben was about a Florida park ranger of the Everglades and a bear and his adorable son. The Andy Griffith Show was about a small town in the Carolinas. And if you've ever been to the Carolinas, the weirdest thing about that show is there were no black people in that show. And that's like impossible. That's like, I don't even know how they did that. So the number 1 and the number 2 show. And America loved these shows. And so what I was writing about was the fact that why did America love these shows during a time when Southern law enforcement were not nice most of the time to people, you know. There were not too many Sheriff Andys in Birmingham. So my theory was that we preferred the America that is like Disneyland. And Disneyland is the happiest place on earth, except everything is fake. So the America we prefer is not the America we live in. It's the America that lives only in the imagination. So I wrote the poem American Happiness that became the sort of central thesis for this book, American Happiness. It used to be in Mayberry, folks were never colored, not even black and white, but beige, khaki, a little gray. In Mayberry, Deputy Barney had 1 bullet and no need for rope. The only burning he did was for his Thelma Lou. The sheriff had no gun, just an Aunt Bee baking pies, and an Opie full of freckles heading off to fish or sing or court, whatever Opies do. In Mayberry, no doors were barred or locked. The jail was mostly empty. The only water hose we ever saw lay peacefully curled on Sheriff Andy's lawn. Mayberry was a southern town. Technicolor must have killed it. Made Andy a cranky lawyer, sent Opie running all the way to Hollywood. But we remember, black and white, from Chicago to Watts to Selma, we tuned in to connect the dots of Opie's face, while we dined on mashed potatoes and buttered corn right before our TV sets. Mesmerized that in this southern town, the sheriff used his hose to water Aunt Bee's roses. We were so happy and relieved. We laughed until we could not think until we fell off our sofas and wingbacks and cane bottoms. We laughed until we could not see or hear, until we could forget that outside our own windows, other sheriffs with loaded guns, snarling dogs, and ready hoses made quick work of a world on fire. I'm going to read two last poems. One is based on an incident that happened to me. And as I've already said, humor is kind of my way of thinking about the world, coping with the world. And when I was about 8 months pregnant, I got pulled over. My two young children were in the back, just not even a block from my house, by a cop who wanted to have a word with me. And he proceeded to scream at me, put his hand on his holster, and I remembered my instinct was to argue with him until I realized that he was about to drag me out of that car and probably beat me in front of my children. And so I just got really quiet. And the only regret that I have to this day is that I did not continue to argue with him and allow him to drag me out of that car and beat me to death in front of my children. The idea being one last body on the pile, one more body on the pile might lead to some kind of social change. And so I wrote this poem in honor of that moment, and it's called Another Thing to Worry About. Coyotes, this is a true thing, by the way. Montgomery is inhabited by coyotes. You have to watch your little babies and your, small dogs in the park, because there are coyotes. What am I telling you about? Y'all probably have coyotes too. Another thing to worry about. Coyotes have moved into the Garden District. It's a good neighborhood with mansions, yards as old and leisurely as the money that saves no one from bad luck or lightning, which kills 37 people a year. 1.2 million are maimed. 7 people a day go up in flames. It's a wonder the whole country is not filled with walking wounded and graveyards. We have learned Ebola cannot be contained in remote regions any more than coyotes who lounge in communal green spaces, prowling for curious small dogs or babies, not unlike my own, who sat in the back seat, or the one nestled in my large belly when the cop pulled me over that time. His body was rigid with fury. Maybe coyotes had rattled him. Everybody fears encroachment. He hated mine into his road space. His hand on his holstered gun made that clear. How I wish I had bared my fangs or made a low growl. I should have sprung for his throat just like he sprang up the hill much faster than the residential limit and cut me off. My fault, he screamed, as if offended by my presence on my own street. Should I have forced my coyote tongue to say, you need to be more careful, 37,000 die in car crashes every year? Or entice him to bludgeon me with, black women are disproportionately jailed and sometimes beaten or worse without recourse? Anything but sit there silent and still and afraid. He left me with a tongue lashing and another tick on my list. So many things to worry about. 1 in 3 black men will go to jail. I have 2 sons and 1 husband. Which one will the odds come for? 1 in 2 women will be sexually assaulted. I have a daughter, a mother, and 2 sisters. Even a coyote could do that math. I have stopped watching the news. And now I read a woman was attacked by a rabid raccoon as she was getting in her car. Took her sons 10 minutes to dislodge it from her leg and beat it to death. It took days, almost too many, to get the shot for its infectious bite. The medicine being expensive and hard to come by. One last poem. This is called How to Survive as a Black Woman Everywhere in America, including the Deep South. And I will tell you that this is a revenge poem against my 7th grade Latin teacher. A man who got between me and Toni Morrison and other parts of the larger world. You can figure those out. Okay. That's the great thing about being the writer. You can always get revenge. How to survive, only the writers laugh at that, because they're writing about you. That's what they're writing about. How to survive as a black woman everywhere in America, including the Deep South. When teacher, sure-footed in her dominion, ignores your raised arm, a single brown cane stalk in the agate of Latin class, when she heaps praise on Caesar and the little blonde Puella who does not know a mo from a mas, while alone in that cane field, you translate as if your life depends on these dead words. Do not protest when fear and hatred show in eyes that look right through you. Do not pick up a field stone to knock teacher's buck-toothed grin down her lily throat. Say nothing, say nothing, say nothing. Smile and praise the little dumb girl. Smile and put your hand down. Smile through every declination of your personhood. Smiling is a lesson you can use. When the man, so certain in his privilege, turns to you in some reception line, inspects you as if you stand on an auction block and not the plush floor of the Renaissance Hotel. When he laughs and says, I heard you were a Negro graduate student, except in genteel and colorless words. When he questions you again and again, hoping for affirmative action to show its face. Do not yell in righteous indignation of your smarts. Do not ask him some questions of your own. Do not shake him with your butter knife. Say nothing, say nothing, say nothing. Smile and answer his questions nonchalantly. Smile when he says, you are smart for a black girl. Smile when he asks you to perform your monkey tricks for his wife, a friend, a passerby. Monkey tricks might come in handy someday. When your brown child goes walking down the street, the hood of his ordinary sweatshirt pulled low about his head, his pockets bulging with Skittles and iced tea bottles. Do not pretend you are surprised when a man he has never seen accosts him for thinking sidewalks are free for all. When they bring his limp brown body to your door and tell you how he brought it on himself was much, much too uppity to live. When they praise the one who stood his ground and shot him dead. Do not scream and cry and cuss. Do not pick up your weapon and kill his killer. Do not blame the jurors for being blind. Say nothing, say nothing, say nothing. Smile and bury your only son. Smile and calm the crazy crowd. Smile and forgive, forgive, forgive. Forgiveness covers centuries of sin. When they knock at last at your own front door, get up sure-footed from the bed you have made. Get your husband and your children up too. Do not stomp your feet in protest. Do not wave the cane stalk of your arm in protest. Do not explain that you are worthy and smart. Do not say you have sacrificed enough. Go quietly into the trucks. Go quietly into the long train cars. Go quietly into the dark ovens, like the coward you are. Thank you.